Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think the title is even more appropriate than we thought when we started, at least, to prepare this presentation, because the work is not yet done before we go to the May and the reception. Thank you, Council, for inviting us and to speak on Netherlands experiences here. I'm not alone. I have Arjan Braamskamp here, who's living and working more than 10 years in the United States, and now completely occupied with water and water-related subjects by Consulate. And Katja is here from Boston, Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency, with more than 5 years experience. And I thought we were a team of three, but Jos Savislak, who's still here, joined our team this morning. And we were wondering if he works for HUD or for the NSA, because and had listened to our conversation in the train. But I think he has internalized his experiences with the Netherlands fully. I'm going to say a few things on history, some lessons learned. We have prepared 3 examples for you, and we believe they are also appropriate for the situation in the United States. And of course, we promised to say something on finance. And maybe look at the Netherlands at some people don't like it, but the European model sometimes resembles a federation. So maybe the Netherlands could resemble a state, a unique state in Europe. This is the Netherlands when we don't do anything on protection. You might say that then we are maybe a very frightened lot. And every day and at night we go to bed and thank God that we are still not flooded. But, you have this misère index. Every year it's being measured how positive people are, how optimistic you are. And we are most of the time with Denmark competing for the number 1 or 2nd place. So, we are not that worried about that situation. If we would have no flood protection, who would gain, you think? A small test. Who are the ones who would like this situation very much? I can tell you, those are the Germans, because the Germans always come to the Netherlands for beaches. And they are a doorstep away. 60% of the people live below sea level. 70% of our GDP is produced there. So, yes, it's absolutely necessary that we do protect ourselves. Our Katrina, our Irene, our Sandy, and I live now 3 years in New York. I started with Irene, then there was a blizzard, even a small earthquake, although I didn't notice it myself. And then there was Sandy, in a period of 3 years. Wake-up calls. This was our wake-up call. 1953. In the Netherlands, and especially in the student days, you were asked, are you born before or after 53? So literally, it was a watershed. And as you can see, I was born before 53. This is not New Orleans, this is not New York, this is not Boston. This is our Dutch experience. What are the problems in the Netherlands? What do we face? What are our challenges today? And there are many. 1, if you believe it or not, sea level is rising. And of course we have a long coastline. We have storms, and they are irregular. They come and they go, but they are more than ever. Every country with a coast is facing coastal erosion, so that's not different. We have extreme river discharges. Most people think that our problem is the coast and coastal areas, but we have sea level rise, coastal issues, but we also live in a delta. So we have river extreme river discharges coming from melted water. We have intense rainfall that can be measured. But we also have lower river discharge, which is an important issue. Why? Because Rotterdam, and I come back to that, the biggest harbor in Europe, there's a lot of transport going through inland waterways, which is environmentally a very effective but also attractive way of transporting goods. And that's posing difficulties, especially in summer. We have summer drought. We have salt intrusion. We have subsidence because of peat soils, clay, and sand. Again, we are in a delta. And the spatial developments. Because the western part of the Netherlands, where most of the population live, and where most of our GDP is being created, is still the most attractive place in the Netherlands, and is growing. So we have spatial development. What have we learned from our Katrina, from our Sandy, from 53? Three main lessons. One has been mentioned already: building with nature. It's moving away from engineered solutions, which doesn't mean that we don't need engineers. That doesn't mean that in Delft, on our universities, or in Twente, we don't need students to study the subjects. Of course we need engineers, but we need engineers to work together with designers, landscape architects, and of course also with community developers. I will give you some examples where we restore natural conditions. One is room for the river. It has been mentioned already. If I go back to the first slide, that was an impression of an architect, of an artist, but it's real. It's being built, and you will find it in Nijmegen, in the center of the country. We remove grey structures, we rethink current zoning, and don't forget, it's all national interests, because the interventions in Nijmegen have influence on other parts of the country. And extremely important, it's not only about protection, it's also about added value. Added value in the economic, social, and recreational sphere. Added value through public space development. Three examples, quickly. One is interesting for you living in a coastal area, the sand motor. The second one is interesting maybe for the lady who talks about historical cities like in Vermont, because Kampen is an historical city in the center of the Netherlands, close to our inner lake, which is called the IJsselmeer. And the third example are a number of examples coming from Rotterdam, urban storage issues. Let's start with the coastal issues and the sand motor. Who has been flying over the Netherlands in the last 3 years? Have you noticed the sand motor? I did this summer when I started my trip to New York, back to New York. You fly from Schiphol, then the airplane follows the coast, and you have two marvels of Dutch engineering. One is the sand motor, the next one is the extension of Rotterdam Harbor. Why the sand motor? Well, because we have issues of coastal erosion. Every 4 or 5 years, a lot of dredging has to be done. Trucks have to be on the beach, have to bring sand. Can nature not do it? Is there no possibility that nature is playing the role of these dredging installations, of these dredging ships and these trucks? That has been done before the coast near The Hague, between The Hague and Rotterdam. That's the sand motor. That's building with nature. And the interesting thing of it is that these are the projections. But what is happening? It's going much faster. 2 to 3 times much faster than originally predicted. And some of you have been working already with Deltares, which is a world-renowned institute. They are doing normally a proper job. But in this case, they underestimated nature. I believe nature is like me, impatient. They really wanted to make a success. Descent motor. Pros and cons. There are always pros and cons. It's costless. We were supposed to talk about numbers. This whole project cost $90 million. Annually, the Netherlands is using, how much are you on? 55 million euros for beach nourishment. We do not yet know the cost-benefit analysis exactly, but we know that it's a much better and cost-effective approach. But it provides you also with recreational opportunities. There's a lagoon, there's a lake, and there is less environmental impact. You need less movements from ships and from trucks. And of course, it's a pilot project. We do not exactly know how it will work out. And we do not exactly know the reduced impact. But it's an interesting phenomenon. And it may be interesting for the coastal areas in the United States. Second example is the construction of an inflatable barrier in the center of the Netherlands, at a strategic location where there is the danger of a storm surge. Advantages are non-intrusive to the landscape, and it has a minimal impact on the ecology. And also you don't need less reinforcements of the diking system. But there's an issue. If you block water, and I will show you on the map, it will go somewhere. And it may be detrimental to the city, the historic city of Kampen. So this is a two-way approach. One is to protect yourself against the storm surge in the inner lake of the Netherlands. But secondly, there's also an approach and use the existing infrastructure, the old city walls of Kampen, to build a barrier. For that you need, in this case, volunteers. You need what we call the Hoogwaterbrigade, a high water army. But you preserve the historic city. Here's the inner lake. You see Rampol, if you can read it, the word most to the southern tip. There, the inflatable barriers constructed. It automatically starts when half a meter water, when the water level is increased with half a meter, but then it pushes the water to this historic city of Kampen. Here you see the barrier, made of nylon, 25 years lifetime, with a price tag which is rather reasonable. It looks a little bit like the Thames barrier. And it can block 4.5 meter water. 15 feet above the water line. The pros are minimal invasive to the landscape. The reduced cost. It's fully automated. It doesn't mean that you don't need personnel for that. You need maintenance. And it has an affordable price tag. And the overhead costs are relatively low for such a project. The cons are, again, we do not exactly know the ecological impact. You still need to reinforce the dikes behind it, but not as high as originally. And one issue is the ownership, of course. There's maintenance. Who owns it? The Netherlands has decided that this is part of our critical infrastructure and it's being owned by the national state. Here we have the historical city of Kampen. And here we have, right at the top, the old situation, underneath the new situation, when there's no flooding, and left a situation when there is flooding. Now you see those black strips there. This model can only work with sufficient community development, where the local population, on the basis of a volunteering system, acts immediately when there's a signal, there's a need to install the barrier system. That's a disadvantage because you need the discipline of the volunteers. But it's also an advantage because people realize that they also play a role in the protection. And look, I know there's a whole debate going on in your country about protection, but also on keeping, let's say, the view, the vision, and the historic side intact. That's possible. And we talk here about a protection against 2-meter level increase of the water. Here you see at the right how it works in practice. You maintain the traditional look. You keep the historical cultural preservation. Yes, you need a citizens brigade. It will cost you $35 million, which, I mean, if you compare it to the costs of a flooding of this town, is rather minimal. And the con is, of course, it's a risk. How do you organize your citizens and your community engagement? Up till now, the project is finished, I think, 2006. So it has proven its worth and its effectiveness. Who knows which city we try to? Anyone? I guess. Rotterdam. Most people know Amsterdam. It's a beautiful city. I love it. It's probably the most beautiful city in the world, maybe. But this is one of the most interesting cities in the world. Destroyed inner city during the war in 1940, when the Germans started bombarding the city and wanted the surrender of the Netherlands. So a lot of the old city is destroyed. And one of the issues in this city is the lack of capacity of the sewer system. Because before and after the Second World War, most of the canal system has been blocked, has been filled. We had a tradition in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, in the beginning, especially of the last century, to throw everything in our canals. So at a certain moment, people say, this is a hazard, it's a health hazard, so we cover it, we block it, we don't need those canals anymore. But yeah, it means that you have you need a huge sewer capacity, and that doesn't exist. And it costs a lot of money to create a new one. So what to do? A few examples. One, normally you build a parking garage. This is a new one near the Rotterdam Museum. At the space that is now filled by water, is normally filled with building material and not being used. For a relatively moderate price, this new system has been installed. It can collect rainwater by heavy storms. And it's in operation now. The second one is being constructed. That's a little bit different. That's on the roof of a building garage. Near the new, where you see the arrow, that's the new Rotterdam train station. Modest capacity of rainwater, but still it limits, of course, the use of the sewer system. And this is one of our favorites. It's the water square. This square is capable of storing 1.8 million cubic meters.
65 billion cubic feet.
And it has been tested last year in October during a very heavy storm. It's nice because it's near a school and it's playground. It's near a church and this church is using it. But it's also a fantastic system to catch water. And it has been filled to the rim. And talking about finance, there is at the moment no money in Rotterdam to improve, let's say, squares, to create playgrounds for children, let alone near schools. But there is money for the sewer system. And in this case, it was combined. It's working, and it made an interesting part of Rotterdam even more interesting. What's the pro? Well, to combine the possibilities, those two functions, for which one, there's not sufficient funding available. Of course, it increased your water storage capacity. And it's essential, it reduces the pressure on the drainage systems. And there has been, and there's now no time for it, but there has been a long process of community engagement before it was built by a young group of architects. And the investment, we're talking about $5.5 million. $5.5 million. But there's a con, and that's important for all of us. When I visited the square a couple of weeks ago, and it's at the moment election time in the Netherlands with the municipal elections, they said, well, there are a number of political parties who believe that this is a play toy for civil servants, because they only look at the way you make an area attractive in a town. When I asked, well, you had in October, you had your heavy rainfall, you had your 1.8 million cubic meters. I mean, what was the effect on the drainage system? Yeah, we didn't measure that. We didn't communicate that. It's essential with those projects, even in the Netherlands, even where we live with water, and we talk a lot about water, to communicate this also to the larger public. This is not a toy for civil servants, for boys. These are solutions which we need nowadays. Again, the lesson. What are our building blocks? It's building with nature. It's moving away from engineered solutions, but that doesn't mean that we don't need engineers. And we restore natural conditions and using nature to work for us. This morning I read in the Dutch paper that a small river called the Berkel has been enlarged with 2.5 kilometers again, because that's the way the river wants to flow. We have made our rivers into canals. Nowadays we put them back to their original state. So we give room for the river. And the multi-functionality is an important one. The whole project in Nijmegen started with the construction of an area, of a construction of houses, an area where a planning was discussed to construct additional housing. Then the debate was, yes, but what happens with the higher flooding? What happens when the discharge of the river becomes much higher than we expected? And then the whole plan was rediscussed and laid out. And then the decision was made, let's make the room for the river, which means that you have a higher level of protection, but also you create added value, because your real estate, we want to live nowadays near the water, your real estate increases in value. What are the costs? Because I can imagine that nowadays, with limited budgets of governments, you say, yeah, this is all very fine. It looks fantastic. But what are the costs? The real and most important infrastructure of the Netherlands, so the ones who I more or less showed to you, cost us, on average, I would say between 0.5% of your GDP. Our total investments and maintenance costs for water quality and water quantity measures are a little bit higher and are estimated by the OECD 1.27% of our GDP. But then also we talk about sewers, we talk about water quality. So the system of, let's say, flood control, rivers and coastal flood control, doesn't add up more than maximum 0.5% of our GDP. It's an absolute must. I mean, we have no choice. If you talk about cost-benefit analysis, what has been done earlier, then I mean, it's so clear in which direction you have to work. That's why we have a Delta Commissioner, which is a colleague of ours, a civil servant, and he's the best we can offer in the country. That's why we have a Delta Plan, which is being discussed every year in the Parliament. That's why there is a Delta Act. It's an obligation of every government, whatever color. It's an obligation to secure the funds and also to do every 6 years a test about the quality of our defense work. So it's written in law that a government, whatever the composition, has to do this. Otherwise it will be challenged in the Supreme Court. You all know about Hans Brinker. Hans Brinker comes from, and you know that better than I, a story about silver skates. Well, I think after the Olympics maybe we should talk about golden skates. I'm sorry about this. But this has created, the book created almost 100 years ago, in a kind of Holland mania in the United States. Well, we don't need a Holland mania. But what we need is a good, effective, open cooperation amongst us. We can learn a lot from you, especially with regards to preparedness to disasters. We feel safe behind our dikes, but we know that we are not. And the Minister of Infrastructure and Environment tries to tell a message that we are not. And we can learn from you how you prepare and how you, in the end, effectuate your emergency response. We can learn from a country like Hamburg in Germany. We have heard it this morning. We can learn from each other, and we like to cooperate with each other. And we are proud to be a partner. And we are proud that at least in the consortiums, the 10 consortiums for Rebuild by Design, 4 Dutch groups of companies are working. And this is a good way to start. And we would like to be your partner. And thank you very much for your attention.